welcome to the Cultivating Health Podcast. I'm your host, Justin Gephardt. The Cultivating Health Podcast is a product of my unquenchable thirst for knowledge and my overwhelming passion to share that knowledge to improve people's lives. Utilizing the 7 dimensions of wellness as a foundation, we will participate in conversations with experts in the field, exploring all aspects related to building a totally well individual. And if you're not familiar with those 7 dimensions of wellness, they are spiritual, physical, emotional, professional, intellectual, environmental, and social. Before we get to our guests on this podcast, I need to thank a couple supporters for helping to make this podcast possible. Is your startup venture or small business looking to grow? Limitless Investment and Capital is a CPA firm specializing in startup and small business accounting and finance. Their team of CPAs and business consultants can tailor business growth services specifically designed to deliver optimized results for your business. They can do it all, ranging from accounting and bookkeeping services, tax preparation and assistance, contract or part-time CFO and controller assistance, payroll, general counsel services, management consulting, and more. Their clients are not just numbers. They're people that they know and work hard for. As your business grows and evolves, they'll continually adjust their services to keep pace with your needs and help you get to the next level. They are the go-to small business experts and would love to get a conversation started today. You can find them on the web at limitlessinvestmentandcapital.com or reach them on their office line at 1-800-314-0653. Again, that's 1-800-314-0653. Full disclosure, my buddy Mike is the owner of that company. He's the founder of that company, and I've known him since we were 10 years old, so well over 20 years. He's a good guy, he's trustworthy, and I'd be confident to give him my business, so I highly recommend him. This podcast is brought to you by Precision Haircuts for Men. Located in Southgate, Michigan, Precision Haircuts for Men provides the highest quality precision haircuts and beard shaves in Southeast Michigan. Located centrally on 4th Street in Southgate, bordering Wyandotte, Precision Haircuts for Men is an easy in and out on your daily route. Set up your appointment today at precisionhaircutsformen.com or click the Book Now button on your favorite social network. Look up Precision Haircuts for Men on Instagram, Facebook, or Google to find us. My guest on the podcast today is Cassie Sobelton. She's a health and wellness author, podcaster, consultant, speaker, and television personality in the Detroit area. I first learned of Cassie when she was presented the Breakthrough Award by the prestigious Greater Detroit Area Health Council back in 2015 for her impact on the health and well-being of Southeast Michigan through community engagement and innovation. Her first book, titled Back to Balance, went to #1 on Amazon in its first week, and her second book, titled The Employee Wellbeing Handbook, will go on sale in the fall of 2019, so right around the corner. Cassie has a very interesting story as it relates to her wellness journey and how she got started in this occupation. We discussed that journey on this episode, as well as multiple other topics related to exercise, nutrition, and employee wellness. I really enjoyed the conversation that we had, and I cannot thank her enough for taking the time to chat. So without further ado, I hope you enjoy my telephone conversation with Cassie Sobelton as much as I did.
Hi, this is Cassie.
Hey Cassie, how you doing? It's Justin.
I'm great. How are you?
Doing well, thank you. Thanks for taking the time to chat a little bit here with me today.
Yeah, I look forward to it. Can you hear me okay? I'm on my, like a headset.
Yeah, no, you sound perfect. Good. Perfect. Okay. So,
awesome.
So how's your day so far? Staying busy?
Yes, it's been a busy but good day. And unexpectedly had a friend stop by for a couple hours, which is super fun.
Well, I guess it's nice to have the company, but kind of unfortunate if you got a lot going on, right?
Right, yeah. No, it was fun.
Well, that's good. So,
yeah, how about you?
Had a doctor's appointment, but outside of that, nothing all that outside of the norm, I suppose.
Good.
Yep. So, my first question, if you want to start.
Let's go.
All right. So I know your background a little bit, reading on your website and what have you. So I was wondering if you'd be willing to share a little bit more of that. I know what I've read is you were working in the corporate world, a lot of hours, and that's what kind of led you down the path of getting sick and kind of sent you into the wellness world. So if you could expound on that, I think that would be super interesting to me and anybody else who might listen.
Sure. No, I appreciate that. That starting to the intro. I feel a lot of people in our world, in the corporate wellness world, have a similar story where they start out or they get into it because they had some type of illness or something they ran into, which kind of let them see the light or let them see things differently. And my story is no different. So I actually went to school to go into corrections, and I did. I'm sure you didn't read about this online, but little sidetrack. Went in and was a corrections officer for a while, and I really wanted to go in and be a hostage negotiator for the FBI. Never got there because watching that industry, watching my coworkers, watching the life they were all living. I remember even at a very young age knowing that I didn't want to live that life. They all seemed, many, maybe not they all, but I would say the vast majority of them seemed disconnected. They weren't that healthy mentally or physically. They had crazy amounts of divorce in their life. Almost all of them were divorced at least once, sometimes twice. It just seemed like a group of people that weren't that put together. And I remember thinking, I don't want to end up like this. And maybe this type of job is going to do that to me. And so I found my way into automotive and worked in automotive for a few years. And I loved it. I worked for my stepdad, who was a really great mentor to me. And very often we don't find mentors like that in life. So that was a really cool opportunity for me. And spent a bunch of time working with him. But I do think I was working too hard. And it's not just the job, but I obviously was lacking a lot of balance in my life in general. And unfortunately found my way to illness and was struggling for many, many years with Crohn's symptoms. But back then it wasn't as easily diagnosed or as often diagnosed. And they didn't know what was wrong with me until I wound up in the emergency room and had to have some major surgeries. And it was coming out of those surgeries that I kind of took a step back and started reevaluating what I wanted to do with my life and where I wanted to spend my time. And it seemed like helping people get healthier was a good option and something I enjoyed doing and thought I'd make a change with. So moved into that field.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. From the Crohn's disease diagnosis and your issues with that, how do you think you got to that point? Was it strictly stress related? Probably, all the hours you were working, the stress, the food you were eating, lack of exercise, or what have you. Probably all the above. But
well, Justin, it all starts in gestation, and clearly, no, I'm teasing. But my whole life, I look back on it, and I really was never that balanced. I didn't have a sense of real strong spirituality. Now, if that means religion or if that's just meditation or whatever someone's spirituality is. I didn't have that. I didn't have, maybe my mind was always in a good place. My body was not. I was never a big exerciser. I didn't eat properly. I did a lot of things wrong. And, it's amazing how when we live a life out of balance, I really believe our body tries to tell us that through illnesses and injuries and anything else that goes wrong. I really believe it's the body's way of saying, hey, look over here, you're ignoring something. And, when we don't listen to our bodies, when we don't listen to those internal nudges, they get bigger. The volume gets turned up. They get bigger. And the next thing I know, I'm in an ER room and having my intestines removed. I probably could have stopped that decades prior if I understood that type of navigating my body's system in that way, if I understood that. But I didn't. And so it took me a lot longer to figure it out. And so, kind of the goal of why I went into this field was to try to help people navigate what their body's trying to tell them. And our bodies are very, very, very intelligent and intuitive, and they will guide us in the right direction if we listen and if we follow them. And I can never tell someone what they need to do to get healthy, but I can help them understand the cues their body's trying to tell them. And so that's what I love to do with people.
So then after you dealt with these Crohn's symptoms and these issues and going to the ER and all those fun experiences, I'm sure, what changes did you start making? Again, it's probably a pretty generic question, because it's diet, exercise, and spirituality, etc. But
yeah, it was all of it. And what I really started doing was taking cues at where I needed to go by what showed up in my life. And, I at the time had no training. I didn't have any education around nutrition or exercise or, any of those pieces of health. Even when it comes to the spirituality piece, I grew up in a very Catholic family. I went to private all-girls Catholic schools.
Okay.
I understood Catholicism, but that was about it. And so for me, it was this weird meld between being open to what was going to be put in front of me, going and searching out the right knowledge, the right practitioners, the right people to help me find what I needed to do to stay in balance. And, at the same time, like navigating, because westernized medicine and after these surgeries and really, really big surgeries, I mean, they did save my life. And the drugs they put me on, I'm sure, kept me alive and kept disease at bay and infections and everything else that comes along as a side effect of major surgery. So I'm super thankful westernized medicine was there for me. And that's when you want it, right? This is when we need to engage in that kind of medicine. But I knew if I didn't do something differently, I would just be another statistic that got put on 10, 20, 30 drugs and never came off of them.
Yep.
And I didn't want to be that person. And so I started talking to my practitioner saying, can I start coming off these drugs? Can I use food to help reverse my disease? Can I meditate? Can I do yoga? I don't know. What can I do? And they basically told me, we haven't seen a whole lot of success with that. So no, you're going to be on these drugs the rest of your life. And I had this like gut knowing, this very overly confident 20-some-year-old inside of me, saying, no, I'm going to do this. I'm going to get off these. I'm not like the rest of these people. And luckily I wasn't. I really got committed to it and I made the changes. And for me, it was like this weird, I never even knew what the raw vegan movement was, but there was something internal to me that said, go to the store once a week, buy all the fruits and vegetables you can get your hands on, wash them, cut them up, put them in baggies, and start eating. I mean, that was the first thing I did.
Yeah.
And I then slowly just found the only things that weren't aggravating my stomach were raw vegan or overly processed white bread. And those were like the only two things I could eat. Well, I knew the overly processed white bread probably wasn't a good option, but the veggies and fruits probably were. So I went down that path. And next thing you know, people are saying to me, oh, are you raw vegan? I'm like, what does that mean? I didn't know any of it. So I started researching, and there's this whole body of study around inflammation in the body and cooked food and meat. And I just really dove deep into those types of studies and decided, okay, let me pull back and go raw vegan and see what happens. And I did. And within a year, I'd completely reversed all the symptoms of my disease, but I was hardcore around it. I really did it. Not a single drop of anything other than raw vegan food. And then after a couple years of leveling out there, I started adding in a little bit of cream or adding in a little bit of eggs, just almost like a very severe elimination diet, where then I slowly started adding back in. And it just took me a really long time to figure it out. But you know what? It took me 25 years to get really sick. So it's okay that it took me 4 years to figure it out, And people say that to me often. They'll say, oh, God, it's such a commitment. You went back to school to become a nutritionist and a yoga instructor and a this and that, right? All these things I got degreed in or certified in. And I said, yeah, but, it took me 25, 30 years to get really screwed up.
Yeah.
It's really not that much time.
Sure.
I mean, it's a real testimony to the body. And, how quickly not only do we get out of balance, but how quickly we can get back in.
Oh, yeah.
And so that has very much been a big focus of my work is, no one's too far gone. That's just not even possible. If you're still alive, you can take one step closer to wellness. And the next day, one cut. And, just keep down that path. And typically we open our eyes one day, 4 years, 10 years later and go, oh my gosh, I'm so much healthier than I was before.
Yeah.
And we're always creating habits, either healthy or unhealthy. It's just, are we conscious of the ones we're creating? And, if we're conscious and we want to create healthy ones, then that's where we're going to go in our life. And if we're unconscious, which the majority of people are as they age, they just slowly become sedentary. They slowly start eating bad foods. They slowly start drinking more. They slowly add a couple pounds per year on their body, which slowly creates inflammation and slowly creates aches and pains in their joints. And that slowly gets compounded with sitting at a desk all day, which slowly gets, it's just like this rolling ball that, you can either have it rolling towards health and wellness or you have it rolling towards the opposite. And, how do we get people to realize this ball's rolling? Is it going where you want it to go? And if not, like, do something about it.
Yeah, it's interesting you say that because I'm reading this book right now. It's called Lost Connections, and we can get into that here shortly because you're a spiritual wellness person, so I want to talk to you about that. But this book called Lost Connections. It's a book about depression. And basically this guy's argument, his name's Johan Hari. I don't know if you've ever heard of him or not, but
I haven't.
Phenomenal book. I'm really enjoying it. But anyway, his argument is the reason that there's so much depression, so much anxiety, so many people on these SSRIs and et cetera, down the road is basically the ways in which society operates, right? We have to get up at the crack of dawn. We have to go to work. We're not valued at our workplace. We got to work too many hours. If we don't do something right, we get yelled at. Our opinion doesn't matter. Our views don't matter. We got to do what we're told. And, all of these things that just, I guess, living in general, society in general is kind of, I'm doing a horrible job of explaining it, but if you read the book, you'd be like, yep, this guy's onto something. So basically,
Sure.
yeah, it makes a lot of sense compared to what you're saying, that just the ways in which our society operates with the food choices we have, the go-to option is to sit down as opposed to stand up. We got to work all these hours at jobs we don't like. All of these things, that it all contributes, and it's just one of those things where if you're not cognizant of it, that's the direction, that's the path everybody's going to go. So I think you're certainly onto something with that.
Well, it's a path of least resistance in our society.
Sure. Yep.
And it's really unfortunate because our society has not stacked the deck in our favor. It's stacked the deck against us. And, it sounds like what your book is getting at. What was the name again?
Lost Connections.
Lost Connections. But this idea that, we're dealing in this corporate environment that we're trying to live our life around, and it doesn't fit. And, these fight or flight hormones that we have introduced into our body every day. So you get yelled at, like you were just saying, or your opinion doesn't count, or you do a lot of work on something and don't get praised for it or recognized in any way. And they evoke feelings of, fight or flight, being stressed, being in these situations. And we're constantly pulling cortisol out of our body, which, has a whole host of problems that go along with that. And it's like a hamster wheel. And when we're on it and we're in it and we don't know anything different, we just think that's life and that's it. And everyone has these woes. But, quite often when you start traveling around the world and you go spend some time in Thailand or, who knows, wherever that might be, where they just don't have a life like this. And it's like, all of a sudden you look at the U.S. and you think about the way everything runs and these corporations and these people, and, you remember these little memes. I remember seeing a lot of them when I was even young, before memes were even a thing. But, this idea, like these cartoons on Wall Street or whatever, the Wall Street Journal, that would have like a person in a hamster wheel. And I remember even as a kid being like, but what else is there? Yeah, ha, 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 there's a person in a hamster wheel. But isn't that Isn't that what life is? Not realizing that's just American life. That's not what it's like. And when I started traveling around the world and looking back, I'd be like, oh my God, I get it now. I get why they have those portrayals of American people and American workers sitting in their little cubicles on their little treadmills and, or their hamster wheels, and it's the way it is. But I think our society's changing, and I think millennials are driving that change in a major way. And I think it's wonderful. I do think quite often a generation looks back at what their parents went through, what their grandparents went through, and like, I'm not doing that. That's crazy. I'll make a change. And so I think we are on the cusp of that. And culturally, that's where, employee engagement and employee wellness and employee well-being, whatever you want to call it, I think that's where this whole industry is spawning from, is the idea that this is not sustainable. We're seeing people die. We're seeing them get very, very sick. We're seeing companies shutting down because they can't afford health care for their employees. That's insane.
I agree. I think I heard this, or I read it somewhere a while ago. I can't remember what book I was reading. It might have been a Chris Kresser. I think that's maybe where it started. But I've heard a lot of these gurus, all these books and podcasts I've listened to and what have you, talk about, ancestral diets and basically doing the things that we've evolved to do as human beings. And human beings have been around, depending on your beliefs, a long time. And we've only been working these 40, 60, 80-hour weeks, sitting inside an artificial light at a desk for, 100 years, maybe. And it's like, we're not created. We're not meant to do this. And then we got to sit and think like, oh, why is everybody sick? Why do we have an obese or overweight or obese population in the what, like 60% of the population, 70% of the population? Well, duh, because we're not doing what we're supposed to be doing, why we're created, what our innate needs and desires and things like that are. So I feel like the early on in my interest in employee wellness, it was all, as you know, maybe you didn't even go down that road, but for me, early on, my view of it, probably most people's views of it, are diet and exercise. And it's like, wait a minute, we gotta step way further back than that. And that's why it's interesting reading the early parts of your book, the first 18 pages that you sent me. It was amazing because everything that you were writing down hit all of my major points and my major views now as well, because I've been reading all this stuff, listening to all these things, doing as much research as I can on this, because I've experienced a lot of negativity, to say the least, in the professional settings that I've been at. So I've really tried to figure out, like, how could this change? And I read Laura Putnam's book. I'm not sure if you've read that or not, but
I have, yeah.
That's a good book. Yep. So yeah, I appreciate you sending me yours, and I really really enjoyed. I haven't read the whole thing yet, but I certainly scrolled through it, and it's interesting that you've mentioned, well, you know what? I'll stop there, and I'll just ask you, if you would, before we go any further. We kind of already touched on it a little bit, but your view, I guess your definition, your personal definition or approach to the spiritual wellness that you talk about, and the achieving mind, body, spirit wellness. What do you believe that to be, or feel that to be?
Well, I do think for everyone it's different. And, you know, the first book that I wrote was a little bit more direct, not a little bit more, it was completely directed at consumers. So that's an individual reading it and thinking, what can I do to upgrade my health, and giving suggestions for that. Whereas the next book, the one that's about to come out in October, that one is more at organizational health and well-being. And so when I talk in the first book at the consumer, it's mind, body, spirit. And I like to tell people that's very similar to a tripod. And, you know, you can be as healthy as you can physically. And I've seen it a lot. I've seen a lot of people that, you know, let's say they're like yogis and they're amazing bodies and they can do all these great contortionist moves, and you know, it's really wonderful that they can do all this stuff, and then they're on like 10 prescription pills for, you know, whatever, anxiety or depression or blah blah blah, and those are all, like, again, life-saving medications. I just always would like to see people using that as a to bridge a gap, right? To be able to get over something and then get back to being able to live in balance by themselves. And so what I liked, and that's not always possible. When it is, though, it's a wonderful thing. And so either way, what needs to happen is people have to have balance in all three areas, because if you have 2 out of 3, that tripod's going to fall over if one leg's shorter, or, you know, I mean, it's eventually going to catch up with you. And talking directly to individuals who are thinking about their health and well-being, mind, body, spirit, seems a pretty approachable way to package it. When we talk to corporations, when we talk to people that are trying to set up these, you know, large programs, we have to bucket it a little bit differently. And so, you know, quite often that will help them understand, well, what can I do specifically for my employees around these areas? And so that's where I find the difference between wellness and well-being. And so wellness was, you know, very much that focus on the physical body. How does someone eat? How do they move their body? And that's where all of the research dollars, that's where all of the program supports, everything was going in corporate wellness for a long time. And it was funny because I remember when I launched my first book, Mind, Body, Spirit, it was like just before or right around when things were really starting to pick up around this, you know, these dimensions of well-being, which, you know, it can be physical health is a huge part of that, of course, but so is emotional and mental and spiritual and social and community. And that's the thing that some people are like, what does that mean? Well, do you have a best friend at work? And there's that Gallup question that we've all seen if we worked for big organizations and we do the Gallup surveys, you know. They say is one of the largest indicators of someone's health and happiness is if they have a best friend at work, and it makes sense. Do you have someone that's in your corner all day long, you know, and being able to have that type of relationship? But if not that, then are you a big part of a community? Do you have a family? I mean, community starts with family, and then it goes out to, you know, a broad family, right? So a little bit more extended of a family, and then it's all of a sudden your neighborhood, and then it's your city, and then your county, and then your state, and then the U.S., and then the world. And it's like we are pieces of this community in all these different ways. And how do we give and get support out of that community?
Yep.
And our workplace as a community, right? And so
Yep.
how do we focus on that? And environmental health. So I remember when I took a job down at the Detroit Medical Center. It was my first job in this field, kind of in the population health management field. And I'll never forget when I started working in inner city, and they started training me on things. And I would go to these churches, these mosques, these different areas to be able to meet with social or be able to meet with spiritual groups and religious leaders. And we would just talk about the hospital and, that we can send out vans or buses. And then I did mostly everything in the employer community as well. But it just opened my eyes because I would say things like, being able to get out and exercise, and like someone would raise their hand. And I'm from the suburbs. I've never had it happen where I've lived in a place where I can't go outside safely.
Yeah.
And, where, and then I'd be like, oh, well, what about a gym? And they're like, there's no gyms, and the ones that are here, we can't afford.
Mm-hmm.
And I'd be like, oh, okay, well, what about, healthy food? And they're like, we don't have a grocery store in 15 miles. Okay, well, how about, you know what I mean? I just like kept all these things I took for granted that support my health, they don't have. So it's like, when the lack of that means the opposite, right? The decks have been stacked against them.
Mm-hmm.
And because their environment doesn't support their health, how would they ever be able to get out and exercise safely anywhere in that condition? Or how would they ever? So these people that I was talking to, I mean, they were just teaching me so much about the environmental health. And we see that in employers, right? I mean, if someone is a call person and they sit on the phone all day long and they're not given a stand-up desk and they're not allowed to treadmill desk or move around or whatever it is, right? I mean, these situations you can't avoid. Then you're sitting for 8 hours a day.
Yep.
And unless we're setting the environment up, should it be a city, a county, a government, a school or a workplace, all of them. I mean, these are the ways that we support our health, and occupational health, of course, and financial health. That's a huge, huge, huge buzzword and hot topic in corporate wellness, but individual wellness as well, right? I mean, we all know what it's like to be really stressed financially and not be able to sleep over it, and everything that comes along with that, not being able to give your all at work because you're dealing with creditors or trying to figure out where your next rent's going to come from. And there's just so much to it. So it's like, I think in corporate, it's a lot easier to say emotional support or emotional health or financial health or occupational health. And when we're talking to people, it's like mind, body, spirit health. And so, I don't know, I just kind of look at them a little bit like they're the exact same thing. We're conveying the exact same message, but just in different words.
Yeah.
I hope that makes sense.
No, absolutely, it makes sense. I like your mention of the 7 dimensions of wellness. Or I guess, actually, I think you listed in your book like 9 dimensions, if I remember that correctly. And
I mean, they all kind of cross over.
They do. Yeah. I think I've seen 6, I've seen 7, I've seen 9. So but I think it all makes sense. And I think I've gone, well, you can even bring in Maslow's hierarchy of needs, right?
Sure.
Kind of the same realm. But I think, admittedly, kind of embarrassingly, I spent an overwhelming amount of time in my life just focusing on and cultivating the physical aspect. Like you mentioned this a while ago as well. So I'm in the gym trying to get as buff as humanly possible so I can look good so people can like me, right? And I feel like over, after so many years, it dawned on me like, wait a minute, I have less friends and I'm single now, but so what am I doing? Like I'm missing something, right? So then I see these, I learn about these other dimensions, Maslow's hierarchy of needs, all of these things where it's like, what, the time that I spent cultivating that one dimension, that one aspect, I should have been, I could do that, but then also talk to people, go out places, meditate, meet new people, like do all of these things as opposed to just go to the gym and go home, go to work, go home, like don't, not really try to cultivate any of those other aspects, any of those other dimensions. And I think the social aspect, which is what that book that I mentioned is about, Lost Connections, basically that book, I've gone down this really, really long road of the social aspect, the social dimension of wellness lately. I read the book Bowling Alone by Robert Putnam. I'm not sure if you've read that book, but
I haven't. That's in no relation to Laura.
I don't know. I thought about that, but I don't, because this guy, he's He's a professor at Harvard. This book came out in 2000, 2001,
Gotcha.
something like that.
Okay.
But basically, it's like the go-to, I don't want to call it the Bible, but for lack of a better word, like the go-to Bible for American community. Because it's like 500 pages of super small print. It took me like 6 months to read this thing. But basically, all this guy does is he did just exhaustive research. And he just lays out for 500 pages all of these stats related to and reasons for the decline in American community, which is basically kind of what we're talking about now, and how important social connections are, and why our world now, our society now, is so disconnected and so unhappy and so sick and so mad at one another. If you're a Republican, you hate Democrats, and vice versa. Those types of things. But it's that perspective, that avenue, that dimension of wellness, I think, is what I was missing for a very long time. And I think it's probably one of, if not the biggest aspect, especially from an employee wellness standpoint, because I've been in professional settings where people are afraid of going to work. People get other people fired. They're afraid to go to work because they're afraid to get fired. They're afraid of other people because other people are going to get them fired because they need to protect themselves. So they're going to get somebody else in trouble so they lose their job and not themselves. So I think that's got to be a massive portion of the culture change within the workplace, trying to implement those basic needs of social connections, of connecting to one another, especially from you talk about Gallup polls, your relationship with your boss, with your direct supervisor. I mean, that's a huge influence in why people stay at jobs, why people leave jobs, right? So I don't know. I think I love that topic, and I can't get enough of it.
Yeah, I mean, I do think our society has become one of that, right? Where the majority of people are out there thinking all about themselves and what they can accomplish and how they can save their position in life. And yeah, it's interesting. I recently, speaking of similar books, there's a couple, because I ended up buying a bunch of this guy's book once I read it, but it's called The Diamond Cutter. And it's like his God, I don't even know how to say it. It's like Geshe Michael Gross or something. But it's the Buddha on managing your business and your life. And the whole idea is that if you only worry about what you need to do for other people, the universe will then just take care of you in the most random, unexpected ways possible. So you don't need to worry about taking care of you, because those answers are easier to come to you than you worry about it and how much more fulfilled you'd be. And I just really believe that's true, and I think that's where so many people are missing the boat. But it's scary. It's scary to be the one person in the room worrying about and protecting everyone else when it feels like everyone else is protecting themselves. But somehow, some way, the universe typically does take care of the people that do that. It's really, really quite interesting. But yeah, I agree. And that's why great bosses, great leaders, that's exactly what they do, right? I mean, they're constantly looking at their staff and the people that surround them and trying to figure out how are they going to care for them, how are they going to lift them up, how are they going to take care of them.
Yeah, and that's all a culture thing in the workplace, I think, and the culture is kind of dictated from the top down, right? Because if I've been at jobs before where I was afraid to get up from my desk and go for a walk, because if somebody saw me, I get in trouble because I wasn't at my desk working. So
I mean, was that like very early in your career?
Yeah.
Do you think maybe that was your own perception? I'm only asking because I remember feeling that way, and looking back on it, I feel like maybe I self-imposed that.
Well, yeah, I'm sure there's certainly there was some of that too, because you want to make a good impression and you want to make sure that you don't get fired.
You're so young, you don't realize that you're allowed to get up and go.
Sure, but it's that particular experience was a very unique one, anyways. So I think, come to find out, my fear was warranted, but at the time that I had it, I think it could have been certainly a large percentage, large portion of self-imposed, but that's a story for a different day, I guess.
Yeah, well, and also it's a testament to the fact that managers need to also cultivate that type of culture within the organization. They have to be able to say to their employees, look, guys, I don't want you feeling like you can't get up and take a walk. That's crazy. Like, I want you to feel safe to get up and take a walk. I need you to feel safe to go take a few deep breaths when you're stressed. I need you to feel safe to go run to an emergency if one of your children are sick at home. Like, it's okay. That's life, and we'll figure out how to get through it. Now, I need you to come back to work and finish your work, or make sure someone can help you in your absence, right? You know? But a good manager and a good leader and a good culture will provide that support up front so that a new employee might not be wondering what's allowed and what isn't, and then just take the road of it's not allowed, you know?
Yeah, and then you can take these things, take these ideas, these simple ideas, and you can compound them down the road to where they can really benefit the employer from a retention standpoint, right? So
100%.
I remember reading, and that, you know, I think I just read the other day that the average cost of replacing an employee that makes $45,000 a year is $15,000.
Isn't it insane?
That's ridiculous. So like all you got to do is just
treat them right.
Yeah, that's nice. It shouldn't be that difficult. And
I know.
I remember reading some of the benefits from the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. So I read that once, and I remember reading that the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, they give a year-long maternal leave, and then they give a year-long paternal leave as well.
Right.
So like little things like that, like obviously, you know,
huge.
Yeah, money's not everything. Is probably pretty far down the list actually from like a motivational standpoint. Like people can make a lot of money and still hate their jobs. But those little things like that, if you treat them well, you give them opportunities to be off. Even like I've read that Google allows their employees to take 8 hours a week and work in a different department that they're employed in. Like if they have a different interest, they can go over there and work for 8 hours a week in that particular department. And I think I got that right. So don't quote me specifically on that, but I think it's what I read. And that seems like such a great tactic because you're still paying people to work and they're still being productive at work, but you're keeping them more engaged and minimizing the amount of burnout they're going to have. So like it's best case scenario.
You're training cross-functionally within the organization, which is, you know, irreplaceable when it comes to how quickly they can get your organization ahead.
Yeah, exactly. So it's like there's ways, and that's what I don't understand. And granted, it just became apparent to me relatively recently, but it's like you can focus on profit and not give a crap about your employees, but if you focus on your employees, your profits are probably going to be that much better.
Sure.
And I don't understand why that's not more of a common sense.
You know, I think part of it is we're expecting a lot of people to translate what it's like to be a good person into what it's like to be a good manager, and it's hard. It's hard to manage properly. It's hard to know how to get all your, you know, A through Z checked off on your to-do list today, and then still be able to think about forward, future thinking ideas and where you're going to take the company, and then at the same time make sure all your employees are cared for and their medical expenses are covered and there's such and such and such and such, and then the deadlines are being met, and then this. I mean, there's just so much that sometimes the squeaky wheel gets the grease, and quite often that is the board or the C-suite or the investors or the stakeholders, and you know, you're trying to, managers might just be trying to figure out how to get through next week.
Yeah.
You know?
Oh, sure.
And I don't think it's ever malicious. I just think it's, you know, people haven't been trained properly for it. And I think our industry, employee wellness, employee culture, any of those, it's a new industry. I mean, something can be 50 years old and that's still new. I mean, we're constantly evolving. And, you know, I mean, if you think about occupational health and well-being, it all starts with safety, right? And this all started like in manufacturing days, and how do we stop people from getting hurt at work? And then it turned into like, how do we stop work hurting people in any way, so that, you know, in their home as well, as it extends beyond work. And now it's become, how do we keep them healthy, because it's the cost of healthcare. And then it's, how do we keep the culture happy? And then it's just been so transformative and just constantly evolving. And I think, you know, all different corporations, depending on their budget, depending on their industry, depending on their workers. I mean, you know, you look at Google, like you just mentioned. I mean, mostly millennials.
Yeah.
You know, mostly out in California, although spread throughout the world, I'm sure.
Yeah, yeah.
You know, then you look at like a law firm. you know, a very old foundational law firm in Bloomfield Hills, Michigan, right?
Yeah.
They're going to be way different with much older employees and very set in their ways on what they're used to and the benefits they deserve, and they're very legal and you can't put anything by them, you know what I mean? And it's just a very different culture, and how does each support that health and wellness? And I think therein lies the whole puzzle around this situation, is how do we move forward when there is no apples to apples? You know, it's just like I was saying earlier, I can't tell someone how to get healthy, but I can teach them to start listening to their body to learn how to get healthy. So it's kind of like the same thing with corporations. Like, I can't tell HR manager number one that they have to do these exact things to get their corporation to a place of supporting well-being, but I can tell each one of them on a very step-by-step consulting process what they're missing or what they need or what their organization would allow for, and you know, how do you make all that happen? It's just, there's a lot of moving parts.
Yeah, and I read something the other day, and it's funny because this is way outside the box, but I'm sure it probably won't be for you. I'm sure you probably thought about it, but the productivity cap, our ability as human beings, again, that's a generalized statement because everybody's different, but I read that generally speaking, the productivity cap, our ability to focus, is at like 6 hours in a day. So I find that interesting because we're all required to work 8 hours every day. So there's a question for you too, like, why, if we're working 8 hours and productivity is maxed out at 6 hours at best, wouldn't it be more beneficial, I guess, to bring it from 8 hours a week down to, or 8 hours a day down to 6 hours a day? Or one of those things where you're only working 4 days a week and then you get 3 days off, and, you know, one of those things where you're not working as many hours, but from a productivity standpoint, you're still as productive. So I don't know what, you know, it seems like probably most people would hear that, most people in the business world, managers, what have you, and think you're nuts. But I think there's some validity to that, right?
So I think it depends on what job.
Yeah.
I mean,
oh, sure.
You know, like, I even know with myself, I go in these spurts where, like, some days I wake up, I have so much energy and I'm getting so much done and I'm just knocking through that to-do list. The next thing I know, it's 9 p.m. and I haven't stopped working all day.
Yeah.
And it was the most productive day of my life, and it was 14 hours and I got a week's worth of work done, right?
Yeah.
Then there are other days, like, I just can't get into it. I keep getting distracted. You know, phone calls take me off and emails take me away from what I'm doing. And next thing you know, like, I've had 8 hours and I've gotten nothing done. And so I don't necessarily even think it's like 6 hours versus 8 hours.
Yeah.
Or, you know, sometimes I think it's just like your mood.
Sure. No, yeah.
And I think all that is legit, but I can't even imagine saying, nor would I ever say to one of my consulting clients, just let your employees work when they're in that mood.
Oh, sure.
The exact same moods on the exact same days, you know, and you start talking production or shift workers, and, you know, the line can only run so many parts an hour if you're doing X or Y or Z. So, like, it has to run. And so, yeah, I totally get what you're saying. And I think in the exact right situation, and, you know, if we worked for ourselves, that's essentially what we do, right? We barrel it through it some days at 20 hours, and then other days we don't open our laptop till 1 p.m. You know,
sure.
And that's just how it goes. But it's not always that easy or that cut and dry when it comes to corporate America. And it's unfortunate because we have to play in this world that we're playing in.
Oh, sure. Oh, sure.
You know? And so I think there's like a mix of all that into one. And I think if employees had they were empowered. They were empowered to say, look, I know I have to get these things done. I know my due dates. I promise you I'll get them done. Like, I'm going to show up. I'm going to, you know, show up with the work that I promised you. But let me do it on my own time.
Yeah.
If I want to work at 8 p.m. to 1 a.m., let me do it then. And many employers allow that.
Yeah.
But many don't.
Yeah. And I think what I read, that I'm pretty sure that was geared more towards like a knowledge-based desk job, right?
Yep.
Because you're right. I mean, the situation with shift work, factory work, line work, I mean, it kind of, that's probably a difficult world to impose some type of employee wellness, because you can't really, I don't want to say you're working with limited options, But in some way, I guess you can say that about any occupation. But in some ways, I feel like you're working with more of a limited options, because if you're trying to help, midnight workers, third shift workers, I mean, how much of our metabolism, how much of the way our body works is dictated by circadian rhythm? And if they're they're sleeping during the day and awake at night, then we're starting from a deficit, right? So that's kind of frustrating too. I'm sure you've had that experience working with that type of population, but it's I
mean, there are some people, and this is all about too, like pre-placement, pre-employment screenings and evaluations, and knowing what someone's made for, And I mean, when I say made for, I don't only mean their mind. I mean, but their circadian rhythm, because we all slightly have a little bit different of a internal time clock, and there are some people that do way better in those hours than others, and those are the people that should be working those jobs. Unfortunately, though, we're in this society that values different jobs, different pay, of course, right? And so someone may have I'm totally a night person, I'm a night owl, that's when I do my best work, it's this, it's that, but they can't find a job that can support the family the way they want to in night shift working, and so they end up doing day shift working, which is counterintuitive to their body clock, and vice versa with these others. And there's just societal restraints on them to be able to really do what's true to themselves, and that's unfortunate, because if we really all followed what was true to ourselves, we'd stay happy, we'd stay healthy, we'd stay balanced, we'd stay disease free, we'd stay just mentally healthy.
No,
we're out chasing things we think we need other than that.
That's interesting too. I think you mentioned that a little while ago, you chasing those materialistic desires as opposed to the connections and experiences type stuff, right? And that's in this book as well, where you have those materialistic people who, a lot of times they're going to work jobs that they hate so they can buy themselves a brand new car, when in reality they could be making a little bit less money, not as stressed, doing something they like, where they have time to have experiences that they enjoy, or connect with their families or their friends or whatever it might be. So I think that's a weird societal quirk that I guess maybe that's kind of an innate human thing too, but it seems weird that that's the direction that we've gone. I don't know, but
I think we're being marketed to in a lot of ways, and I don't just mean by marketing, right? But we're raised in society by our parents, by our families, by our schools, by our everything we come into contact with. Setting up these values for us that we've chosen to buy into. In every country we go to around the world, it's different, and it's interesting because you take the same person from America over to London, and their views are going to change around what they want to spend their money on, and where it's just crazy how different we can behave just by being put in a different area, and even how much the physical rates of disease change. So there's been all these studies around people when, large groups of people, and I can't remember all the details, but, let's say over in Asia, right, their breast cancer rates are much lower. And I can't remember all the stats around this, but when they come to America, many of the same women that had 0 or 4% chance all of a sudden raised to the typical American breast cancer percentage, and it's just insane. But it does go to show how much our culture, how much our communities, how much the exposures to the toxins mentally and physically in our life actually create these diseases inside of our body. Sure.
Yeah, it's a great point. It's an unfortunate point, but it makes so much sense. And it's funny because then we have all these cultural issues, we can call them, but then we have the conventional medicine issue, which just treats the symptom as opposed to treating the underlying root cause. And going back a while ago in our conversation now, when you mentioned going to raw vegan and that helping your issues, it reminds me of, I don't know if you're a Mark Hyman fan. I'm a huge Mark Hyman fan myself.
I am, yeah.
So listen to his, I've read his books and listened to his podcast. And food is medicine, and it makes so much sense because if you're going into the doctor because you have high blood pressure and you get medication in your 7 minutes of your visit with the doctor on average, and he gives you a medication, but yet he doesn't say, well, you got a BMI of 37, and you haven't exercised in 15 years. Maybe there's a little bit different approach that we could take to fix the underlying cause of high blood pressure, as opposed to just trying to mask it with a pill. So it's so interesting. The more I learn, the more excited I get at the opportunities to help fix problems, but the more depressed I get at the just overwhelming amount that we've kind of imposed on ourselves as a society. But
right. It's interesting. So there's a couple things you said that always bugs me about medicine. And so the first is, and I totally agree, food is medicine. And it is medicine, but it's also poison.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah. And I think
right
people
food is medicine.
Are finally at the point where they understand the first part of that sentence. Food is medicine, right? We know that there's medicine inside of food, but if it's not medicine, it's poison.
Sure.
And so this whole idea that we are poisoning ourselves all the time. And again, the only reason I bring it up is to remind people that if it's not medicine, it's poison. And that's fine. I'm all about the 80-20 rule. 80% of the time, do the right thing for your body. 20% of the time, do the things you love, aren't good, but limit them to 20%, right? So we're going to put poison in our body. Make sure it's no more than 20%. But make it the really important 20%. So if you love wine, make it wine. If you love cake, make it cake.
Yep.
You know what I mean?
Sure.
Only make it the things you absolutely love, because you have 20% that can be put in your body of poison before it really starts making a problem for you,
Sure.
But, when it comes to physicians, and it is, I think, not only easier for physicians to write prescriptions, right? So if you think about, physicians want to see outcomes. And if the outcome is to lower someone's blood pressure, they can give a prescription. And this all started way back when prescriptions really didn't cost the end consumer that much money. I mean, if you think 30, 40, 50 years ago, right, when this all started, it was literally a guaranteed almost outcome. And so I know if I give someone this pill and they take it twice a day, their blood pressure is going to lower and going to save their life. However, if I tell this person not to eat red meat and only eat anti-inflammatory foods and make sure they're getting 8 hours of sleep and right, all these things that they have to do, they're probably going to fail because they just don't have the support, right? Because if they had the support, they wouldn't be here in the first place with high blood pressure.
No, you're right.
I do think that what is going on is that physicians are in a society where they have to cover themselves, right? They have to make sure that they're not being a little too woo-woo. And it's these two Western Eastern philosophies, they have to blend together perfectly, and it's a very, very tough balance. And so it's now we're finally at a place where information is so readily available. I mean, it's everywhere. You can go on YouTube, you can go on Google, you can go anywhere you want. Now, you can't guarantee that it's all going to be the best information, but it's everywhere.
Oh, yeah.
But we can go out and we can educate ourselves and we can learn, and it never used to be this way. And so now I'm seeing people, they're finding their way around their physician because they're realizing their physicians just simply aren't trained on lifestyle. They're not trained on nutrition. They're starting to get more and more now, but they're just not trained to the degree where they can sit down and tell you exactly what to do to get there, because again, it's very personalized and it takes a lot of work, and we don't teach that in school, which really, I still don't understand why we don't have just, first through 8th grade, just like we should have a finance class for all those kids. I don't know why we don't have a know yourself and know your body class for kids, instead of telling them how to identify when things aren't feeling right and what you should go see and what type of doctor to engage. And, that's unbelievable to me that we don't teach people that stuff. And so anyways, it's really interesting because we're in this society where you're damned if you do and you're damned if you don't when you're a physician.
Yep. Well,
and it's so hard.
Yeah, and the thing with, you mentioned being educated. I don't even think, I've heard that so many times from Mark Hyman and others, where or physicians, medical school, they don't even have any nutrition classes. I think that's starting to change now as well.
It is changing.
Which is good.
In the last 5 years.
But it's so funny because my doctor, who is a great guy, I really like him, but he, I go in when, my yearly physical every year, although now he said come back in 2 years because I'm fine. But I was telling him about, these books that I read and these gurus, I call them, like Peter Attia and all these super educated, super knowledgeable, super accomplished professionals in this field. And he basically just says it's a bunch of BS. I'm like, well, maybe some of it is, but I can't wrap my head around the fact that it's all BS, because I think there's so much science out there. And then I've heard that saying too, or whatever you want to call it, that it takes on average 10 years for scientific research to go from publication into mainstream medicine. So the stuff now that is coming out about nutrition, whether it be like, magnesium or vitamin D or whatever it might be, omega-3 fatty acids, now people might think it's a bunch of BS because those conventional medicine docs don't have the time, because they got 5,000 patients they got to see, don't have the time to keep up on that science. So then, 10 years down the road is when it actually might become mainstream and common practice within conventional medicine. But by then, we're already way behind the curve.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting to hear any physician. I mean, because, I would like to think the majority of physicians, and I do think the majority are, but like they're open-minded, and you would want that in your doctor. But I think when he says it's all a bunch of BS or whatever it is that he said, it feels very much like the right thing to have said is, look, I can't tell you what's true or what isn't. We don't have the database of studies on kale and parsley that we have on, whatever, blood pressure lowering medications or statins or whatever it is that they're talking about. It's like they can show these double-blind, crazy, huge studies, from the drugs that they know, and they can tell you what those outcomes are going to be. They can't tell you the nutrients in kale. And how do we know that the kale was farmed properly? And how do we know that they didn't use dangerous pesticides? And it's just, there's so many variables when it comes to food and how it was grown, and what if it's genetically modified and what type of nutrients are in there, and if you're able to digest that, and if you're taking enzymes with that, if you're not able, and if there's just so many ifs when it comes to food versus these drugs that they are like, this is ironclad, and then they can say, but food is BS. Well, it's not BS. You just don't understand it.
Yeah. And
you haven't seen the studies, and no one's done the studies because there isn't a kale organization out there that's taking billions of dollars from lobbyists. You know what I mean? So I think that's it's a pretty arrogant response, but it's probably his way of saying, like, I don't know it. I don't know it well enough to prescribe it.
Well, yeah, but I don't want to get, because again, I think he's a good guy. I didn't want to get too mad at him, because at the same time, it's like, he spent all this money and he spends all this time and he was taught all this stuff, and it's like, who would want to go through all of that just to be told, for lack of a better way of putting it, you're doing it wrong? And I'm not saying that he was doing it wrong or that he is doing it wrong, but in some ways, like, it seems like if it's I don't know, because I don't know, I just, like you, I think I'm just not a huge believer that the best approach is just say, well, here's this drug, take this drug for the rest of your life and you'll be good. Because even with SSRIs or, depression medication, whatever it might be, like, whatever it's causing you to be depressed isn't going to go away just by taking the medication. You have to, something in your lifestyle has to change somehow. So that depression is no longer really, or whatever's causing that depression is kind of minimized, or you're out of that situation, right? Because then that's probably going to have a better impact than the medication itself. Now, like you said, the medication could probably certainly support, like in a supplement type fashion, your progress, but it's not, it's not just going to fix everything. So I feel like, I don't know, but you're also right.
Well, or if it fixes that, it could very well cause another issue or imbalance in the body.
Exactly right. And I heard something on Peter Attia's podcast, and I might screw this up. I'll try not to, but he had a guy on there, Jason Fung. I don't know I think that's his name, Jason Fung. He's a diabetes and like obesity expert, and he was talking about the fact that we've been giving diabetics, type 2 diabetic, I guess both of them take insulin, but give them insulin shots, but insulin packs already full cell, like already glucose filled cells with additional glucose, which he's saying it's like, stuffing an extra shirt into a suitcase. Like, you already have so much that you're basically causing more extreme diabetes because those cells are already packed with glucose, and that extra insulin is just shoving more in there, like an additional t-shirt into a suitcase, which is perpetuating the problem, even though your blood sugar levels actually go down from the insulin. So like, it's an interesting thought because, like you just said, how many of those drugs are actually furthering the problem? The same with like GERD drugs or acid reflux drugs, where it's minimizing stomach acid, when in actuality you already have too little stomach acid,
right?
You know,
and you actually need to take HCl.
Exactly right. So it's just it's weird how that works, because you can be perpetuating the problem even if it kind of looks like you're fixing it. So, and if you, like he says, which is, it's a little more complicated than that, I think, but if you exercise, you can burn off all of that stored glucose in those cells, right? Because it's stored energy, so you can burn that off if you exercise to burn it off. Granted, there's more to it than that, but generally speaking, it makes sense. So, I don't know. To kind of switch gears a little bit, you own a business. It's called Sinbella. And would you be willing to expound on that a little bit? We can wrap it up in a few minutes, but I thought I would ask a couple specific employee wellness questions, because I was actually really, really interested in asking you these from your experience, because I actually really want to know.
Awesome.
So
I appreciate that. Sinbella is a company I started in 2011 as a traditional vendor, which for those that are in the industry, they probably get that. That means, we had a portal, and we did biometrics and health fairs and flu shots and, all the other fun stuff that goes along with some of the on-site versus virtual well-being. Over the years, we became more of a consulting company. And so now we work with benefit brokers, with health plans, and even vendors. So our old competitors, helping them either enter the market, exit the market, change their strategy, developing tools and resources for them to use with their end clients. We thought that the market got saturated very quickly in the last 5 years, and we were no longer differentiating ourselves with what we were doing with our services, and just kept getting request after request for consulting from those three companies. And so finally, I took a long, hard look at the model and thought, you know what, I think we're going down the wrong path here. Let's take a step back. And I, again, very much lining up who I am and what I want to do in life with what my business is doing, so I can live the happiest, healthiest life and still be able to support myself with income. Agreed. How do I change my company to be able to support the work that I actually have coming in, the work that I enjoy doing, the work that I find most beneficial for me to give to the world? So we made that change recently, and it's been interesting, really. It's opened my eyes to a lot that's going on in the market. It just, it's a very, very big market. Wellness is a big word. It's a I think they said $2 billion to a $4 billion. They're expecting it to almost double in the next couple of years. And it's an exciting place to be. And I love watching it. I love seeing everything that everyone's doing, from, consumer products and wearables and all that. Right. I've been a spokesperson for a couple large brands and been able to do satellite media tours as well as national media tours. And awesome. It's really cool seeing some of the really big guys in the industries. I'm actually unable to give exact names, but I mean, like huge pharmaceutical names even that are coming out with natural products that they want people to rep. And my first, inclination hearing or seeing any of that was like, what? That doesn't seem up their alley. And then I'm like, wow, big companies like that are finally taking chemicals and dyes and preservatives and all these things out of their food and, everything that's going on. It's like, it's so promising, to be able to see all this and the wearables that are being made. And, really the industry is driving such a huge change, and I'm excited to be part of that. So we do a lot of that, but a huge part of that is employer wellness. So mostly through the brokers or through the health plans. But we have a few end clients that are still employers that we work with, which is really fun. But it's just nice to be able to see the industry from so many different sides and so many different clients. It's just really interesting to kind of put all the pieces together.
I'm jealous. I like that. I really need to get into it. We can talk more about that when we're not recording another time. But with your experience in employee wellness, worksite wellness, you mentioned biometric screenings. We both read Laura Putnam's book, and in her book, something really struck me. something that did really strike me
I already know
is,
what you're going to say.
well, her view that HRAs and biometric screenings can basically give employees a negative tone to start the whole process. So what are your thoughts on the necessity of making employees go through health risk assessments and biometric screenings? And I know you work a lot with health plans, which I think is, you're probably even more qualified to speak on this. But especially if we're coming at employee wellness or worksite wellness from a culture change perspective, I feel like the culture change is so much deeper and so much more broad than HRAs and biometric screenings. Is it even, obviously you could offer that as an option for whoever it is that you're consulting for, but do you find that personally necessary at this point after the experience that you've had, either of those things or both?
Yeah. So I think that is just completely employer and culture driven. So I think an HRA or a biometric is an analytics tool, right? It's a way to capture data and then use that data to support your programs and processes you're going to put in place to achieve whatever goals you're looking to achieve. So I always like to take kind of this, and I learned this through, years of watching some of the best people create these strategies and programs and understanding, taking a step back and tying a well-being program, its goals, its success matrix, to the corporate philosophy and what you're trying to achieve as a corporation. So I'm trying to give a good example, like Symbella, for example. We want to, our goal is to make money in business. Our other goal is to support our employees' health and happiness, to support our clients' employees' health and happiness. If someone were to come in and tell me that an HRA would be necessary for me to do either of those things, that's just simply not true. Right? But if a corporation has a goal in place of having their employees, let's say it's the military, and let's say the military needs those employees to perform at a certain level literally to save their lives. Okay. I think biometric screenings and HRAs are very useful tools to be able to make sure that their employees are healthy enough in order to save their lives.
Oh, absolutely.
So that's like every single thing I look at in corporate wellness is like, hold on, okay, that's really cute. You think you want to do a health fair. That's really nice. You want to do an HRA or biometric, but let's go back here, because we had a 6-hour discussion on the strategy and what we're trying to achieve and how we're going to get there. Do we need this to get there? And if they say, absolutely, those employees could die because we don't know if they're physically fit enough, I'd be, yes, you're 100% right, and that's part of your strategy, right? So that's how I look at all of it.
Okay,
Who is it? What are they trying to do? But the majority of companies, I don't think either are necessary to do direct with an employee, unless they have willing participants. Like, I certainly don't think it's something you force people to do, right? I don't think that's going to work very well, and that's why there's so many laws around the incentives, because if they're too high, it feels like they're being forced to do it, because it's, because they can't make up that money in any other way, and that's why all these incentive laws are pending out there and keep changing and all these other things. But yeah, I think they could be a tool. I think they're more importantly aggregated data that we need to be able to utilize in huge populations too, I mean, those are really, when we start looking at big populations, you really do need that type of data. It's very hard to nail down. If you're in a company that has 100 people and you have 2 HR people, they probably really have their finger on the pulse of what's happening in that organization. They probably already know what everyone's challenges are. They probably, they have a good sense and understanding typically, versus someone who's managing 20,000 employees across the world. So I would just always take a look at that. But I do agree with what Laura says, that you don't want to start a program out like that. That's probably not your kickoff event. And I've made that mistake. I remember years past advising clients to do stuff like that. But they're the same clients. I do remember, and by the way, what's in the HRA? So health risk assessment, or, whatever you want to call it, health assessment, because now a lot of companies take the word risk out because they feel it just doesn't set the tone so well. But I remember one company specifically, and we addressed loneliness with it. What we did was we put something in there about, do you have anyone at work you consider a friend?
Yeah.
And if no, why not? Like, so basically, what are your barriers to that? And are you interested in meeting socially some coworkers? So we had like 4 people that wrote back of these 250 people on this survey saying, yeah, well, I don't have a friend in the workplace. It's kind of a bummer, whatever, this culture isn't very inclusive and this and that. And so we invited those 4 people. Now, it's all HIPAA compliant. I couldn't tell who that email was going out to, but the people who did state they basically have loneliness in the workplace. It's not how we worded it. We sent an invite out to those 4 people to a lunch with the CEO and with HR and myself and a few others that were there. And we did like a little party for them. And the 4 of them became friends. They had no idea they were targeted for that. But like, what a great way to use an HRA, to be able to figure that. So it wasn't about biometrics or about their numbers or how many fruits and vegetables they're eating a day. But it was a way to get that type of information, then invite them to a lunch. They don't know why they're there. They don't know the other 3 people in that room answered yes to that, right? I mean, so it depends too how creative you get with these HRAs.
Yeah.
And if what are you looking for with them, and what are you going to do with that information?
Yeah, I think you're right. I mean, every situation is different. Every company is different. Every individual is different. So that's definitely something to keep in mind when I'm going down this road. But I also think from an HRA perspective, I think you hit the nail on the head once again, because it shouldn't really be like, I think HRAs are so like 2010 or whatever you want to, because it should just be like a survey. And that's a phenomenal story that you told, especially with your utilizing the loneliness topic, because I'm giving a presentation. I think I told you about that, but giving a presentation on loneliness in October in Florida.
And who's that for?
The National Wellness Institute.
You did tell me. I'm just trying to plug you.
Yep.
When are you doing that? Tell us everything.
Well, I am doing it on October 3rd.
Awesome.
And it's 10:15 to 11:45, I think is my time. But
that's really exciting, by the way. I'm really excited for you on that, and I think that's going to give you really, really good exposure. You're going to meet some great people there. You're just going to knock them dead, I'm sure.
I'm looking forward to it. I've been practicing quite a bit. I hope I don't overtalk, but because I got like 55 slides. Well, probably like 50-ish slides of content, and I got 75 minutes. So I'm hoping that I don't just jabber too much, because I've oversaturated my brain with this stuff, but I love it. So I'm looking forward to it. I think it's going to be it's a depressing topic, but it's also can be a happy topic too, I think. So I appreciate the answers to those questions. The next question I wanted to ask, you already kind of touched on it, and then we can wrap it up, because we've been at it for like an hour and 15 minutes. But you mentioned a little bit ago incentives, and that's one thing that I kind of struggle with, the idea of incentives in an employee wellness program, for multiple reasons. One, laws that you already kind of alluded to, but then the other thing,
it's scary because they're so confusing.
Well, yeah,
and they're not defined.
Yeah,
I mean, you can do something that looks like it's within the law, and next thing you know, you're not. But sorry.
No, you're okay. I just the initial experience that I had with incentives was my first job out of grad school. And we were given the population, because I was a health educator, and we were giving the population that we served, we were giving them incentives just for showing up to things. And after a while, I'm like, oh, whatever, that's fine. But then after a while, it dawned on me, I'm like, wait a minute, these people, like, they're not really doing anything to get the incentive. So it's one of those things where it's like, if we're going to give these people an incentive, they should at least show us that they've done something in some capacity to earn that incentive. So there's that perspective. But then also I feel like people are much more maybe not even much more likely, but somewhat more likely to participate if they get something out of it. And obviously you can say that they're going to have benefits from participating in something.
Sure.
But on the surface, if you say, well, if you do this, if you participate in, for lack of a better example, this walking challenge, you'll get a $100 gift card.
Mm-hmm.
That's going to make people much more likely to participate if they can get a free $100 at the end of it, as opposed to getting nothing at all, just walking. So I guess, given your experience again with all the above, and obviously every situation's different, what are your thoughts on incentives and how to utilize them, or do you utilize them at all?
Yeah. I do think there's a place for them. I think the idea in, moving from extrinsic to intrinsic. And so those who might not know, that basically means an incentive typically starts as an extrinsic incentive, which means it's an external motivator. It's something
like
from
money.
The outside in, that gives you money and says, okay, this is something outside yourself that is motivating you to do something. But the hope and the goal is that someone gets started on that. They really start feeling good. They maybe lose a little weight. They're, sleeping better. There are a million different things that start just snowballing as you start making a few good changes in someone's life. And then eventually that incentive is no longer needed, and it's an intrinsic motivator, right? So the way you're feeling, the way you're looking, the way your relationships are going, whatever, they're getting better. And so that becomes an internal motivator. So incentives are typically very good for that. They're the hook, right? They get people hooked and they get them rolling. That said, quite often some people do show up just for the incentive. And, even those people, this is how I'd look at it. It's only a good thing, because people who are showing up, let's say for a lunch and learn, strictly to receive that incentive, whatever that might be, if it's a lunch, if it's cash, if whatever, right? That's an incentive of some kind. But if somebody has a free lunch, that tells me enough about where they are socially to know that they need that, right? So I don't care if they're not into nutrition and they're coming to a nutritional lunch and learn. They're going to be there with 20 people in the room who are in nutrition. They are socializing with their coworkers. They're choosing to spend time with them in a room rather than, going in their car to have a smoke. I don't know, or a nap, or who knows, right? I don't know, but I do like the idea that it at least gets them involved in some type of subcategory or community within their workplace, and exposed to people who are otherwise more healthy than they are, and probably will help them along. So then it only takes, the next time they see each other in the cafeteria and like, oh, would our nutritionist like that? Ha ha ha. But it does become something in the office, right? They all went and they experienced this. I don't think it can hurt. And when we're talking just little amounts of money, and again, if the corporation is bleeding money and they're in trouble financially, you don't do that.
Yeah.
But, and some of them do have a lot of money. I mean, many businesses do very well. And if they do have that and they want to give money that way, have at it. Awesome, But I just don't think you can unlearn anything. And I think when you do have the right teachers in the room, when you do have nutritionists in the room who can make something stick, like one of the easiest things I like telling people as a nutritionist when I wear that hat, which isn't nearly as much as I'd like to anymore in public speaking. I'm always speaking about corporations and strategy and, well-being programs. But when I do talk about that, one of the things that always gets me is I say, eat the color of the rainbow. And everyone's like, not talking about Skittles, ha, ha, ha. But seriously, if you eat all the different colors in the rainbow of your food, each color designates the phytonutrients in it. I, even as a nutritionist who has studied this, when I go up to a salad bar, I don't put green peppers on top of my green lettuce. I go for the red peppers or the yellow peppers because I know I already have green on my plate. And those are little things that can really make a difference. Huge. And that just took 30 seconds to learn it. And if someone walks out of the room learning that, I'm really happy.
Yeah,
and that was a well-spent incentive dollar, you know?
And it's catchy. Eat the rainbow. Like people think about that. People remember that kind of stuff. So,
they do. And so there's so much to that. And, and the last thing I want to say about incentives.
Sure.
I had a client once that was really, they had a very hard to reach population. The population was all across the United States. They were basically like disaster relief, right? Okay. So if there's a hurricane, they're sent to go deal with that situation, whatever that might be. But the places they go are usually, completely obscure. It's been hit by a hurricane. There's no restaurants. There's no hotels. They're working 18, 20 hours a day. I mean, they're doing some big work. Their family's not there. Their friends not there. Basically, they all tell me they end up, the only place they go is they find some little local bar, and they all drink themselves into a sleep every single evening because they've had some of the most stressful days, and they do this for months at a time, and then they come home. And anyways, their PCP engagement rate, meaning annual visits to go see their preventative care doctor, was something just so low. I don't even remember. Let's say 25%.
Okay.
So they're hoping, and that wasn't that low, but it was low. And they're hoping to get it up. And they had this very large incentive. I can't remember the exact amount, but let's say $200 a person.
Yep.
To go $200 day off work as well. So you get a $200 check for going to see your doctor. They pay for you to see the doctor because that's part of your health plan.
Yeah.
And you get 8 hours off to go do it. And people would not go see their doctor.
Wow.
They're like, we don't get it. Long story short, we ended up trialing this idea of an incentive lottery system. So the state lottery does so well because we all have overinflated ideas of our winning opportunity.
Yeah, right.
We all think we can win, and the entry point is very low for a huge payout, right? Mm-hmm. So when we apply that to corporate incentives, if we're looking at, let's say they were giving $200, or they were bucketing in this incentive bucket, even though no one was taking them up on it, $200 an employee to go see their physician, and let's say there's, 2,000 employees, right? I mean, that's some serious money.
Yeah.
Or do we take $20,000 and everyone who goes to see their physician gets an entry into a drawing, and someone at the end of the year gets $20,000?
That's genius.
Like, yeah, I mean, that's a completely different ballgame, isn't it?
That's awesome.
Yeah, so it was just kind of like, how do you start doing this a little bit differently? Yep. Like, if we're not getting the engagement rates we want with a $200 incentive, which is like and these numbers aren't correct. I would never be correcting, or I would never be presenting correct numbers, but you know what I mean?
No, I got you.
About an old client, but it's just an interesting concept when you start playing around with ideas and numbers and what actually motivates people. Does $200? Maybe. Does 10,000, 20,000, 40,000?
Yep.
Like, yeah, absolutely. Maybe.
Yeah, for sure. That's a great story, and that's a great idea too. I mean, because you think about it from an individual perspective, but everybody loves the lottery for some reason.
Right.
And that big number, it's
gambling,
intoxicating.
Right? Everything that goes on in the body when you're gambling, like all the endorphins and the hormones, and that's, how do you capture that? That's not a bad idea.
Yeah, absolutely. So to finish this up, where can people, if anybody listens to this, whoever listens to this, all the people who are going to listen to this, where can they learn more about you, your story, Sinbella, your books?
Yeah, no, I appreciate that.
Yeah, sure.
Our Sinbella website is sinbella.com. It's SYN like Nancy, Bella like beautiful. So SYNBELLA.com. Or my website. That's a little more of my commercial or direct to individuals, some of my media stuff, but that's just CassieSobelton.com.
Okay.
And yeah, I'm pretty easy to find with a quick Google search. So yeah, we service, again, brokers and health plans and wellness vendors and some employers, but basically with a host of different services. And we would love to talk to anyone. We have a couple salespeople, and if you submit something on the website, it will find its way to our sales guys.
Perfect. Well, Cassie, I very much enjoyed the conversation.
Likewise. Thank you, Justin.
Yeah, absolutely. I appreciate you taking the time to do it, and I will be talking to you again soon. All right?
Yeah, real quick, I just want to commend you, because the more we talk, the more impressed I am with the amount of research that you've done in this field. You are just so ripe with information and poised with all the right, the right topics, the right understanding of them. I'm just continuously impressed, and I'm excited to see what all you do. And I'm really bummed I'm not going to be at the WellCoa thing to see you speak. I'm actually going to be speaking in Mackinac Island, Michigan, which is like super, super north, almost the Upper Peninsula, on the same day. So I'm going to wake up that morning and in my meditation send you some good vibes, and we both rock it out. But it's very exciting.
Well, I that means a lot. I really appreciate your kind words there. I'm certainly trying, and I geek out on this stuff every day, and I love it, and I enjoy it, and I'm passionate about it. So thank you very much. That means a lot. And like I said, I will talk to you soon. So thanks again for the time.
Sounds great. Thanks, Justin. Have a good one.
Yep, you too. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you for tuning in. Today's podcast is brought to you by Kinzit Technologies. Kinzit Technologies provides the highest quality technical support services in Michigan and Ohio. Specializing in EMR support in the medical field, Kinzit provides all of your hardware, desk side, and help desk services to keep your critical devices online and running. Kinzit is focused on providing excellent service for an always-on connection in your business, with the goal of providing you reassurance that your networks and servers are online and secure. Reach out to Kinzit Technologies today for your free consultation. Go to www.kinzit.com. That's www.kinzit.com. podcast is for informational purposes only and is not designed or intended to diagnose or treat any medical, professional, or individual difficulty a person, group, or entity may be experiencing.